Welcome, everybody. Really happy to have you all here. We have a very nice group joining us today, and we have a really important topic to be discussing. So I'm going to keep it short, my part, so you can all have as much time as you need. My name is Allison LaFerlita. I'm the executive director for the Nonprofit Resource Hub. If you are not aware of who we are, if this is your first time joining us, we are an association that provides support, resources, and education, just like today's event, to our nonprofit sector. If you're a nonprofit and you're not yet a nonprofit partner with us, you can jump right into our website and join. It is free of charge for nonprofits to join. We are very, very lucky to have amazing professionals like Christine and Sophia who have given up some of their time and their expertise to join us today, to share their wisdom, to answer some of your questions, and to create relationships with you so you have your go-to people. So again, join us. Check out our website. We are always listing what's happening. The summer does become a little quieter, but the fall is really going to pick up with programming. So if you have anything you want to hear about, you want to talk about, you want to hear from our experts, let us know. If you want to connect with Sophia or Christine after today's webinar and you don't have their information, feel free to reach out to us and we'll be sure to get back to you and get you guys connected. So today is Board Accountability in Uncertain Times. This is being presented by Sophia Shaw, co-founder of PlanPerfect, and Christine Deska, co-founder of BellesBoard and president of the Nonprofit Resource Hub, I will say. And we are really looking forward to having them share their expertise, especially what's going on in today's landscape. So without further ado, further ado. I do want to ask everybody, after you put your introductions into the chat, please feel free at any time to put your questions into the chat. I will be here to jump in when I can to ask your questions, and at the end, we will run through as many as we can. So don't be shy. Definitely participate. I know a lot of people come to listen, but they're here to answer your questions, and we want to hear from you. So now for real, without further ado, welcome to Christine Deska and Sophia Shaw.
Thank you so much, Allison, for having us. I'll kick it off. As Allison described, I'm sure you can all relate to wearing many hats. Sophia and I do the same. And we're sitting here today really privileged and lucky to be part of the Nonprofit Resource Hub. We're both associate members, and we truly strive to be a resource through our membership in the Nonprofit Resource Hub. And just to echo what Allison said, if any of you folks who are with a nonprofit organization or serving on the board have not yet joined us, it's free and takes 30 seconds to join the Nonprofit Resource Hub. And here today, Sophia and I are excited to share information on what we think is a really timely topic. And just to give you a bit of context, we previously had a session around strategic planning through uncertainty. And sort of the resilience that you need right now to kind of decide how to approach your strategic planning process. And when we were debriefing from that event, we kind of said, we keep hearing about the board governance aspects of this and what many organizations that we work with are struggling with. So how can we kind of come to the table and really provide some valuable information to all of you? And hopefully you come away with some tangible takeaways, take back to your organization, take back to your board, and consider how to better navigate this environment. So before I continue on, I want to allow my co-presenter to introduce herself, and then we'll ask you some poll questions to kick off the session. Sophia?
Great. Thanks, Christine and Allison. It's nice to be with everybody from all over the country. I'm the co-founder of PlanPerfect together with Adam Wolford, who's actually on the call today. I've had a long history of serving in almost every role I can conceive of in nonprofit. So I've been in your shoes, whether you're a staff person or a board member. So we hope to cover the waterfront on the call today. And as Christine and Allison both said, please feel free to put questions in here. We don't want this to be, it's not a classroom session. We want to really provide tangible help, especially right now.
Thanks, Sophia. Love working with Sophia and Adam. So hopefully you all can see the second slide here. We thought we would just leave this up during our conversation so that you all have a sense of what we'll be covering, right? If you came here with a specific challenge, you see those three asterisks at the top, please, put your challenge or your question in the chat. That way Allison can log that and interject during the conversation to address your challenge or question, or we'll definitely have time at the end to take questions as well. So this is what we're going to be covering. And just to kick us off with a poll question, we want to get a sense of who is on today. Could you all just quickly give your response? And yes, we understand you may choose more than one, and that's okay. But we'll give you 30 seconds or so. I guess we get to answer this as well, Sophia.
You're right. I don't really fit into one of these categories anymore. Actually, I'm a board member I'm on the board of Wellesley College right now.
Oh,
So
sorry, we have program staffer twice, but that's okay. You get the gist.
you're right.
Well, we're waiting a couple more seconds. And, Sophia and I are sort of on the technology end of supporting nonprofits in some ways, but also on the consulting side. So we really see this topic from the board perspective, but also the leadership team perspective. So these are kind of the dynamics that I feel we're all trying to balance a little bit better in our day to day. And that's what we're hoping we can impart. All right, the results
Okay,
are
great.
in. So we have about a third CEOs, executive directors, a third board members. We've got a bunch of board chairs as well. There could be some crossover there, and another third program staffers. Okay, that's a nice breakdown. Thank you, Kelly Ann.
Perfect.
That
Thank you.
out. So let's jump into the first topic here to really kind of create a foundation, right? We call this the level setting part of kind of the conversation. Because we don't want to assume, and there could be some newer organizations on the call, that board education is happening and that every board member is aware of their fiduciary duties. So Sophia, why don't you kind of just give everyone a refresher on those three fiduciary duties we should all as board members know about and be aware of for our service?
I will absolutely. And I also want to put in the caveat to the whole conversation today is that I always go into every conversation believing that everybody acts with the best of intentions. So if we say something like, well, somebody should just do this, or how to, I want to make sure that we're coming at this from that we all realize we're serving on boards and serving our nonprofits from a very good place. We want to move the ball forward in a mission that's important to us. So what could come off as a criticism at certain times isn't intended that way. Just we all can do better. So a lot of people join nonprofit boards because they love the mission, but they don't really realize that it's a legal responsibility. It's a responsibility not only to be there for the financial outcomes and the mission outcomes, but there are also legal obligations that come. There are three duties people talk about: the duty of care, loyalty, and obedience. And this is for both the for-profit sector as well as a duty of care and loyalty, which essentially requires informed active participation, reading the materials, asking questions, duty of loyalty, demanding allegiance to the organization's mission, not to themselves or their individual colleagues, donors, or causes, and that a duty of obedience, which requires compliance with all the governing documents and mission alignments and adherence to applicable laws. So, where this can really play out in terms of the advice we have to offer you today is to become familiar, if you're a board member, with bylaws of the organization and articles of incorporation, the mission, the strategic plan, and all the laws that might apply to the organization that you're working with.
Thank you, Sophia. I hope that helps. And we all know lawyers who have covered that topic in several hours. So we are trying to just give you the basics so that if you have not put this information in front of your board before, if they haven't heard a session that's a little bit more comprehensive around their legal duties, that's definitely a part of one of the items we'd like you to think about as you go through your year engaging your board. And we can never assume someone knows what it means to be a nonprofit board member. To Sophia's point, most folks connect with your mission, have the best of intentions, and just want to help. And then all of this other information comes their way. We're trying to help you kind of sync that up and think about onboarding more intentionally and many other facets of board engagement. All right, so let's jump to the second bullet here on our slide in terms of the board's overall role. This is an interesting one, right? Because there's a lot of machinations of how boards and EDs or CEOs work together, but what should the board's role be? What is the board actually responsible for? And let's launch our second poll question while I give Sophia a chance to start digging into the board's overall role.
Sure. While you're filling that out, the board's primary responsibility is to oversee the chief executive. So the board has one employee, the executive director or CEO, and they're responsible for hiring that person, evaluating that person, and then also after those two things, supporting that person, being an ambassador for that person. And so often we have our own personal rifts with people. And sometimes we see that manifest itself on a board where a board member may be saying things behind the scenes about the executive leader that are not that flattering. And that does not help. That is not fulfilling the essential role of the board, which is to hire, evaluate, and then support and be an ambassador for the CEO and their decisions, even if they disagree with them. Some other aspects of board responsibility are articulating and updating the organization's strategic plan and direction, and then also overseeing the financial health. Again, if the organization goes bankrupt, it'll be the board's name on the newspaper article, not necessarily the executive directors. And then also ensuring that the ethical and transparent practices of the organization are followed in every kind of way, decision making, fundraising, and communications.
Thanks, Sophia. That's a really comprehensive response. Oh, now we can get a sense of our board sizes on today's call. This was expected. Yep. So 42% 3 to 10, 45% 11 to 20, and then 13% with larger boards. That's a lot to coordinate. Okay, thanks for responding, everyone. And Kellyanne, if you wouldn't mind just launching the second or the third poll question now too, since we're kind of talking about board education a bit more. Really want to get a sense of where you all sit in terms of board training. And do you do it at all? Yes, but only when new folks join, or is it an ongoing part of your organization's process? And before we get into, let me answer this actually for myself as well. Hopefully for me, it's ongoing. I wouldn't be doing my job very well. In terms of the board's overall role, building on what Sophia mentioned, I'd just like to emphasize that key word of oversight. Something that stuck with me in terms of the visual when you think of your board is sort of this helicopter sort of circling the organization and ensuring that that strategy is moving along. And ideally, the board is aware of your organization's strategic goals and where you're headed. And when I approach strategic planning, it's with a few board members on that committee, kind of being aware of that process more intimately, but then being able to convey where the organization is in the process. But again, that's from this higher level perspective of seeing that you're on track to achieve those higher level goals. And I don't know, I know if some of you are on with newer organizations and you're in more of the working board stage of your organization, that's where things become a little bit different, right? And you may have board members taking on larger roles out of necessity. But ideally, and what the board is tasked to do is that oversight capacity.
Right. Right. And it's interesting that a lot of people didn't have the in the poll survey, Christine, that I'm sure you'll talk about in a second, that there isn't board training. And I think that's pretty common for many, and it seems a third in this case, but pretty common not to have board training, because I think that people join nonprofit boards, especially when they're from the for-profit sector, and they think of it more as we were talking about before, like a favor or something fun to do. But they don't really realize how serious it is and that it's real governance. And governance is both a science, it's a legal responsibility, but it's also an art and something you need to practice.
Absolutely. And so this is telling that we have a third that don't have any sort of process for board training. And so what I would just say is, don't feel like you as an organization need to take that on. There are webinars just like this and many other resources that we can connect you to, where you could just simply tell your board members when a webinar is happening, and they would then get access to training and what it means to be a good board member and what their responsibilities are. And that could start that ball rolling in terms of offering that board training without you having to wear yet another hat at your organization. And we'll
Exactly.
share more resources.
Yeah, and in the state of Massachusetts, I know this because I serve on the Massachusetts board, that there are required board trainings and familiarity with the certain fiduciary, the financial, especially aspects of the organization, and those could be some good resources for you.
Thanks, Sophia. Yeah, it's really important because when you think about having an understanding of what it means to disclose a conflict not always being a bad thing, but something that needs to be disclosed, it helps board members that they're actually put at ease to have more knowledge about their role and what it means to kind of disclose certain information and what it means to be an active member.
Mhm.
All right, well, with that said, let's get to our third bullet, risk. And that was really what kind of drove us to have this conversation today, because I was working with different clients and even struggling myself in terms of how do we confront the level of risk you may or may not be under. And this sort of stemmed from all of the uncertainty with federal funding and how that's emanating down and the impact that could have on different organizations. And board members also coming to me saying, I'm not sure if I should get involved. I'm not sure if I should check on the leadership team or, how do we know, what level of risk we're comfortable taking on and what is our risk? So Sophia, can you speak to, what does risk even mean in this context now in this environment? What can we share that would be helpful?
Sure, I think of risk in a couple of different ways. The one most obvious is the financial risk. So making sure that we have enough money in the bank to make payroll. I mean, that's just the sort of the start of that conversation. Making sure that the organization has enough money to survive for a certain number of months. I'd say 6 months to a year, even if the funds are challenged. That the funds are coming from different revenue streams. So whether they be actual earned revenue, raised revenue from donations, public funds, that there is some sort of diversification of those funding sources to making sure that they are more sturdy in case one of those funding sources changes. And one of the things those are things you can look up online, but I want to just say from a human point of view that financial literacy is not something that everybody has, and it's not always the pre-qualification for somebody joining a nonprofit board. And that's really okay because we want people on our board who have all kinds of backgrounds and abilities. But providing some basic financial literacy, especially on nonprofit financial statements, could be a nice next step coming out of this, is that everybody should be able to understand what the financial statements are, what they intend to do. And nonprofit accounting is different than corporate accounting. So if somebody is coming from even if it's from a fancy Fortune 500 role, they look at a nonprofit financial statement and it's not in the same terms as the for-profit world, especially when it comes to fundraising and pledges. Another way I think about risk is through the audit. So the audited financial statements and through risk management. So enterprise risk management, and we're working at PlanPerfect to make a component of our software that helps people do this. Essentially, at the end of the day, it's making a list of all of the potential risks to the organization, whether that is somebody's slipping in the parking lot, and what do we do about that, to our financial risk, staff risk, et cetera, and then making mitigating mitigation plans for each one of those, and really putting them on a heat map. How likely is this to happen, and how much of a risk is it to us if it does? There's some nice templates for this, or we could also talk about this. You can see, like, if you are a golf course in Florida, then alligators are a risk. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to mitigate that risk? You're going to maybe put out a pamphlet saying we have alligators. And some of these are not really deeply complicated things to mitigate against, but they do need to be taken care of in an enterprise risk management process.
Thanks, Sophia. Yeah, so I think for organizations listening who haven't confronted their level of risk or how that's evolving, especially during this current environment, it's better to have the conversation than not. It's better to ensure that as part of your governance process, you do talk about where you might be over leveraged or if you're reliant upon a single source of funding. what's next for your organization? How are you planning to grow and be more sustainable going forward? You know, these conversations do typically happen during a strategic planning process, but if that's not part of the cadence of how your organization gathers, maybe now's the time to sort of think about what process makes sense. And what we talked about in our last webinar, and I'll shout out Sophia's co-founder, Adam Wolford, really encouraging everyone to not view a strategic planning process as this giant boulder, but really to just take a breath and consider what the best place is for your organization to start and have a conversation. And that can just get you on that pathway to the good muscle memory, to confronting issues before you end up having to be reactive instead of proactive.
Yeah, and I'd like to add something here on the human level. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to this because, it's hard to watch the news right now. It's hard to not let the world polarize us in so many different ways. And so as a board member, one of our responsibilities is to, as I said before, to support that executive director. Maybe they're not perfect. That's okay. None of us is perfect. But when we ask our executive director, can you tell me more about where we see risk? Can you tell me more about our finances? To say it in a way that's not confrontational, it's more saying, Christine, you're doing a really nice job. I, Sophia, don't know enough about nonprofit financial statements. Can you help me understand? I mean, so it's about not pitting the board and the executive director against each other. It's saying we are all on the same team in this room. And if none of us, which this does happen, I promise you, understand the difference between for-profit accounting and nonprofit accounting, all right, let's just recognize that that's our vulnerability and find somebody to come in and explain it to us. But we're all on the same team.
Yes, and how we say things matters. The how matters in terms of building collegial relationships and open dialogue, and that all plays a part because we all have our own personalities and we're all humans, right? To Sophia's point, I will shout out one of our co-founders of founding member companies of the Hub, Serini and Associates, and Ken Serini, who's a great partner to all of us, will always emphasize that nonprofits should consider even having a risk committee as part of their board. And that makes it a structural piece. So that's putting it truly in that, routine of who's meeting. Let's just get our quick update from our risk committee. And it just becomes something that you keep tabs on without it having to be this sort of put on the spot sort of question that could, cause alarm bells to ring. It's just a matter of, again, setting that process in motion.
Right. And oftentimes the audit committee will do that, have that function underneath their purview as well. And separating out the audit function and the finance function of the board, the finance committee and the audit committee or the risk committee as separate is really important to keep checks and balances. Oftentimes I see nonprofit boards that don't have enough people with the requisite skills to be on the audit or risk committee, bringing in friends of the organization, so non-board members of the committee, to be able to help them in that way.
Thanks, Sophia. That's a great example. I see that too. So where do we find these folks? How could we have another committee who we're pulling from the same people? The ongoing challenge.
Right, exactly. Because at this point in my career, I'm happy serving on my one board. But if a friend or a colleague were to say, we don't want you to serve on the board, we're not asking you for that, but could you come in and do this and serve on this committee? That would be an easier sell potentially than to serve on another board.
Definitely. All right, now we are at our fourth bullet about where do boards typically tend to fail? What do we see? Where do they struggle? And I'd like to ask, I think this is our last poll question. Kelly's so on it. Before I can even finish the sentence, there's your poll question. What are your biggest board challenges? So is it attendance? Not enough people showing up? Engagement? Just not connected enough to your mission? Recruitment? We don't have the right people? Fundraising? They're not helping us raise money or giving, and then education, not understanding their role, or none. Is your board perfect? I don't think anyone has ever checked that box, but if someone does, please show your face
That
during
would be
this
nice.
webinar. I hope it's not all of the above, but they do tend to converge these challenges in some way. And please don't feel that if you're checking multiple boxes that you're doing anything wrong. You're probably just working so hard and carrying so many balls that who's spearheading this work. So that's why we're trying to kind of impart where you could start with your board development journey. I better answer this question before I get in trouble, right, Kelly? Okay, let's see.
Across the board here.
Yeah. So fundraising does bubble to the top typically,
Yeah.
but also significant challenges around attendance and engagement, and education. Okay, so these are items where you can really course correct at any point to make a really big difference in your organization.
I like 3% said it's perfect. That's great. Maybe in the at
Oh,
the
I didn't even see that.
yeah, at the Q&A, maybe we could hear from some of you who said that. That'd be great.
Yes, for those who said that, we would love to know
Yeah.
what makes your board function so well. We will all learn from that.
Yeah, focusing on the positive is what I like. Yeah.
All right, so now we're at fifth bullet here. How should boards show up in times of uncertainty? And this, like as I mentioned, is the reason why we ended up having this call. And I'm glad that we received over 100 RSVPs for today. I'm guessing this is on the minds of many folks, whether you're a board member or an ED or CEO or on the leadership team, and wondering when to engage the board, or as a board member, when do you come to the table with questions you might have? So Sophia, what would you say
Sure.
about this
Yeah,
time
I
we're
have a
in?
few points here is really making sure that the board members can really feel that the organization, your organization is their one of their primary areas of focus. I think a lot of people join a lot of nonprofit boards and then they become uh, spread too thin. But ensuring that the board members who are on your board really want to be the ambassadors, that tends to take care of those other ones because then they're more likely to show up, they're more likely to give money, and giving people an out, saying, well, maybe this is if you don't want to serve that this is not something you're obliged to do, using nicer language than that could be is something that I would focus on. So getting the right people around the table, or making sure that the right people are serving on the board, and those who want to be friends of the organization take on that more advisory role, as I was saying before. They can also focus on, again, I'm going to go to the human first, and then we can go to some more of the structural, by not fighting on them from between themselves. One of the things that we see in groups of any sort of similarity is that we tend to, the more close we are, the more we tend to fight with each other. And if a board can just decide they're not going to fight among themselves, but we're all going to come together around the mission, vision, and values of the organization, it's going to support it a lot. Another one I see where do boards tend to fail. Um, I'm trying to answer and then both 4 and 5 at the same time, George. So where they tend to fail certainly is fighting among themselves. The second is by micromanaging operations. So one of the things that they can do in a certain time of uncertainty is not micromanage the operations. So I ran a big organization with a $50 million budget. And sometimes my board members would come in and they'd say, well, I think we should raise the ticket for the model train garden from $2 to $3, or I don't really like the chocolate chip cookies in the cafe. And I'm thinking, oh my, I mean, we have Department of Interior contracts, et cetera. Let's not go there. So the board can really focus on not micromanaging. Also by really being loyal to the organization and helping them raise money, and also to help them really look at where the risk is. But I'd say the ambassador role is really the most important part.
Sophia,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
voice from beyond. Before we move forward, I do have a question for you, since you were just talking about a relative topic. How often should a board revisit its strategic plan when funding is starting to get shaky or situations are starting to, the environment itself is changing?
It's my personal opinion that a strategic plan should be a living document, that we can make one for any length of time. So, like during COVID, a lot of organizations were making 6 month, 1 year plans. Or if they're a new organization, it could be a short timelined plan. A more typical timeline for a strategic plan is 3 to 5 years, and those goals can be set. But then I personally every month go in and take a look at the strategic plan that Adam and I created for our company to see where we are on those goals. And so I'd say every month to take a look at the strategic plan, at least every quarter with the board. And then that doesn't mean you need to refresh it as in changing the goals, but it's really to take a look at how have we moved toward the goals that we've established, which ones can we celebrate, really celebrating when those goals have been met, where do we continue to miss the mark every month? Maybe it's time to forget about that program or excise it, or maybe there's another organization that we should merge with. So, Alison, I think that it's really the strategic plan, when done correctly, is a living document and a guiding light for not only the board and the staff, senior staff, but also the frontline staff.
Well said,
Thank you.
Sophia. And just to build on that, I think it's an it depends answer too, and that's kind of what Sophia was alluding to. I mean, if you recognize your level of risk is particularly high, then you would likely be checking on where your organization is going vis-a-vis the strategic plan more frequently. I had organizations during COVID meeting even daily for a few weeks when it was a school in a very sort of critical situation. But typically with a stable organization, it's the quarterly check-in and being able to see it visually. And I think Sophia and Adam have their solution really provides for this. I love the red light, green light, yellow.
Mm-hmm.
In your plan, you can quickly see where the red really drives you to a conversation that the board, given their oversight role, may want to weigh in on. If it's green, we can celebrate our progress and see where we're meeting the mark. And then with the yellow areas are also opportunities to get guidance and more expertise. And that's where board members can feel more purposeful in their service too when those issues come up as it relates to your strategic plan.
Yeah, and also there's sometimes I was talking to a client a while back who said that the board that this organization had a certain number of programs that they did. The board was really attached to some of the legacy programs. They thought that those were the ones that the organization should really be focused on. But the executive director, who was closer to the beneficiaries, the constituents that the organization served, actually was hearing from those people that the organization was serving that those legacy programs actually weren't that helpful anymore. That programs, that different programs were the ones who were really helping the beneficiaries be better, have more wellness, have more success. It was a literacy organization. But the board wouldn't let go of those legacy programs in favor of the ones that were actually helping the organization fulfill their mission. So in that is where you get into like, where do they tend to fail? Where does the risk come in? People sometimes hold on to things that are in their past because they feel like this is why we were founded. We have to keep doing this. And then should they show up in times of uncertainty? They should show up as being agile, willing to change, willing to really listen. And this is something we really like to talk about in strategic planning. We have to listen to the people we're serving. And if we don't listen to the people we're serving or the people representing the causes we're serving, if we're, let's say, representing animals or nature-based causes, then we are going to have a detachment. The board members getting first hand look and relationships with the program beneficiaries or the lands that are being helped is a real key way for the boards to show up in times of uncertainty.
That's so helpful, Sophia. It's a great example. I would also suggest if you haven't ever attempted to offer your board members the opportunity to fill out a self-assessment, that can be a nice way to re-energize and have the really well-intentioned members who joined kind of recall why they wanted to be part of your organization and if they're still fulfilling the duties that they set out to in the beginning. Over time, especially if you have long-serving board members, those can get lost. And well, we can share that in a follow-up resource. It's just a Google form. You can grab it and use it if you'd like. And similarly with a board matrix exercise, which I think many of you know about, but it's really a skills assessment. So for those of you who checked off that box, we don't have the right people. This is a tool that can really help you identify which skills you're lacking in terms of board members, and then alignment among your members to say, we really need this sort of profile of board member to really round us out and really make our board stronger based on our strategic goals, based on where we're headed. So those two tools we can give you some free resources following this that could help as you decide when is the best time to maybe make that space to ask your board members to participate in a different way. And sorry if I jumped ahead on the how do boards tend to fail versus challenges. We're kind of covering a lot in conjunction, but Allison, if anything comes up in the chat that's relevant, just feel free to interject and ask a question. So let's get to the advocacy point. You know, where does advocacy come in all of this? I spent about 10 years at an advocacy organization, AARP, where all we did, that was our, you know, living and breathing. But for many nonprofits, it's like many projects or programs, it's finding that space and figuring out how to find the right partners and where to show up. And that's no different for the board and the governance aspects of your organization.
Right. And the simplest way to engage in advocacy is to simply make a list, which you can do thanks to the internet and ChatGPT, of all the elected and appointed officials who represent your organization. So in a geographic sense. And then also you can look to see maybe in a different geography of our country, there is an elected official who is very keen on putting forth legislation that would help your nonprofit. So you can make a nice chart of all those people, and then you don't have to go and become a lobbyist, but you have as a right to be able to go and make an appointment or go see your officials and just tell them about what you're doing. Tell them about the cause. So if you're looking to help restore the coral reefs, you can simply tell them about what the problems are in coral reef devastation. And then you can say, this is what we're doing. This is how coral reefs are created. So that's information giving. And then you can say to them, if you ever have you come across legislation that has to do with coral reefs or water, we're a resource for you. Because if you think about all that's on the plate of people who were elected, they can't know what the best source of information is about every single topic for every single potential piece of legislation that comes across their desk. So if they say, oh, I remember that Christine told me all about that coral reef. I'm going to call her and her organization when I see this piece of legislation. This is the most simple, and this is not painful. You're not putting yourself out there form of advocacy you can do. And there is a misunderstanding sometimes that 501c3 organizations cannot engage in advocacy. We absolutely can. And in my opinion, it's one of the most important things that we can do. Let's say we're an organization that takes care of cats and dogs that are found on the street and brings them into our organization for care. So that's frontline nonprofit work. It's incredibly important, but wouldn't it also be nice to ensure that the cats and dogs don't get on the street in the first place? So you have to do that by potentially passing a law that helps to have helps that problem come to an end through one resource or another. That's just an example.
Yeah, that's great, Sophia. It's about relationship building ultimately, right? So if you
Mhm.
haven't connected with your local officials to introduce yourself as a board member and why this mission is important to you, you could start there. And then you can take the lead from if you have a government affairs point person at your organization and really figure out the overall strategy and any talking points. And there's so many avenues you can take. And I know at Nonprofit Resource Hub, we are also delving into how to create an amazing toolkit for nonprofits in an even bigger way, to arm you with more of those tools and resources, especially if you're smaller and don't have this in-house shop or don't have a partner with a strategy in place to further your advocacy objectives.
Right. It is important to remember that we don't electioneer, though. So, as a nonprofit, we can lobby, we can advocate for our causes, but we can't support one candidate over another through the nonprofit funds. It's through the Johnson Act.
Right, right. And there's designations, right? If you're a 501c4 organization, then you do have those abilities. But C3 is really, I think the key word is education and really focusing in that realm.
Mhm.
And that keeps you, you know, where you need to be in terms of speaking up, but not crossing the line.
Exactly.
All right, let's get to the last two bullets here. What conversations are most boards avoiding and why? These probably won't be so much of a surprise to you, but maybe you'll kind of consider, yes, we have been putting that off for some time in our organization, and maybe we should figure out when to finally confront or have this sort of conversation. What do you think, Sophia?
I think that I know a lot of nonprofit executive directors who haven't had a performance evaluation potentially ever. And executive performance and succession planning are extremely important. So if you are an executive director on this call, I would ask at least every year, if not every 6 months, to have some sort of check-in with your board chair that results in a piece of paper or something online, a Google Doc, that describes what your goals and objectives are and how you're performing against them. It doesn't need to be a big formal document, but it should be something. I would also say the boards are avoiding succession planning for themselves. So sometimes we have people who serve on the board for decades and decades and decades, and that is not helpful. And we should always be having a culture of change and renewal and succession on boards and having those conversations openly. Again, we're out here to serve our mission, not ourselves. And thinking about succession planning, both at the board and staff level, are so important. I think they're also really avoiding strategic partnerships or mergers. Because sometimes it just makes sense to merge. You can, I think somebody said that there's a cause in Chicago and that there were 7 organizations with the same zip code that all have the same cause in trying to cure a disease. And so I'd argue that there could be some either merging or partnership opportunity there. The other conversation that the boards are avoiding is the topic of fundraising. Fundraising, what's practical and how much pressure are they putting on the staff executive director? Yes, it is the job or one of the jobs of the executive director to raise money, but it is also the board's role. The board has to be out in the most intentional way with the team trying to raise money for the organization and not just putting all of that pressure on their executive director, or they will lose that executive director. So those kinds of topics, as well as the funding model fragility and the simple underperformance of some board members, are oftentimes avoided in conversation.
Thanks, Sophia. Yeah, they're tough conversations, and it is an art when you decide to come to the table and confront succession or the what's next of your organization. I shared with Sophia yesterday that I had a call with an executive director of a smaller nonprofit recently, and she said that they had lost a big contract, a big funding source, and the board came to her from an oversight perspective, and through their discussion, decided to sunset the organization about 6 months, she said, before she would have done so. And in retrospect, really appreciated the board with the fiduciary duty they have to say, hey, if we start this process now, here's how we can benefit the folks we serve, and here's how we can transition folks appropriately to other resources. Because given that loss of funding that was so significant to their mission and their sustainability, the best steps for that particular organization was to sunset. And she, said she pushed back and had conversations with the chair, but recognizes that was where that oversight actually helped her, because she would have pushed until that last day, that last few pennies, to do the mission work that she was tasked to do. But going through that with the board in an oversight capacity allowed them to actually plan this out over 6 months. That was a refreshing story to hear, because I often am brought in when it's down to more of the putting out fires state, when you haven't been proactive and finally realize that you have to make a tough decision about a program or the entire organization. And I know a lot of organizations now are kind of feeling like they've got the funding buckets that are very much relied upon and not sure which one will continue and what to do next. So sharing that just to say that sometimes opening up that conversation in terms of the risk level, this all ties back to risk as well, can be beneficial to do it sooner rather than later.
Right. And you need to have a strategic plan tracking system to be able to do that. Because if you know what your metrics are for your plan, So it's the goal, your goal is X and the objectives are laid out, and you know that you want to hit this metric by this time period. If you're not doing it quarter after quarter after quarter, then it may be time to change the model. It might be time to sunset. It might be time to make a really tough decision. And the last point I'll make on the what are the avoiding is that the executive session of a meeting is very important. So that's when the staff people will leave the room. I like to do it that the board and the executive leader and probably their staff are there, and then first let the staff leaving the executive director in the room with the board, having a conversation then about how's everything going, what do you want to tell us from your perspective, and then asking that leader to leave and let the board talk among themselves every time, not just say, oh, we'll have an executive session this time, but not that time, because then that signals maybe there's something wrong and the executive director can feel their feelings are hurt by it. So every time, even if it's 10 minutes.
Thanks, Sophia. That is important. Um, I think now we're at the last bullet, but I also wanted to make sure we have about 12 minutes left scheduled for today. Does anyone want to raise their virtual hand who said that their board was working so well? Is anyone willing to do that? Because I want to kind of open this up. We do have the ability to be more interactive with our workshop. Let's see if I see any hands. I can see a few screens at once. It's okay if you said that and you don't want to share, but I think that was very interesting. Solid 3%.
I have a question here, if you don't mind.
Mhm. Go
Of
ahead.
course, Allison.
So this one is for Christine. Um, how can board, God, I can't talk today, excuse me. How can board members better understand where their governance responsibilities end and where operational boundaries begin? And I find that this is often a challenge with many executive directors. And sometimes they're trying to communicate this, and that's always great, right? If they're able to manage that on their own. But if they find that they're at a point where they can't manage that on their own and they need to bring in somebody like you, how do you help them? So it's a two-part question.
Yes. I love a difficult conversation. Um, yes, so I'm glad you asked that question because something that didn't come up during this session yet was how important it is to have a roles and responsibilities document in place to manage expectations from the beginning, ideally, right? But if you're in the midst of many members serving for a long period of time, it's never too late to introduce this document as an educational effort and exercise. And just here's a reminder, now we're going to formalize what our board duties are. And Allison, that will take care of that confusion or where do I weigh in versus not? And it will solidify that oversight role versus that, wait, how much, what's for dinner at the gala? Conversation and really remind board members where they're most valuable and where they can really make a difference in their role. So if you don't have a roles and responsibilities document that you reference regularly, I even suggest a check-in at every other board meeting. Like, let's just take a quick peek at our roles and responsibilities checklist or document. This can only be helpful in reminding board members continuously, right? Because how many of us, digest information we receive once, right? We need to be constantly reminded. Our brains are on overload, and especially folks who are in the trenches at an organization that's under a lot of pressure right now. So that's another resource we can share a template for in a follow-up. I don't know, Sophia, you probably have another gem of wisdom to add to this.
I always go to board source for Christine, like for if you can't, I mean, I'm sure Nonprofit Resource Hub has a lot of these as well, but board source also has some nice templates on here. I agree. These are tough questions and tough conversations to have with people. And some people overstep in all aspects of their life. I mean, the people who are probably trying to micromanage their executive director are the same ones who are probably, telling their 40-year-old children how to, tie their shoes or something. I mean, there are some people who just can't help it. And I think fitting those people into a bucket of, okay, we're just gonna, I had one board member who he actually passed away when he was 92 years old. And his entire time he was on my board, he told me how he didn't like our voicemail system. I mean, what are you going to do? You just knew that once every few months that that was going to happen. So there are tough conversations to be had. There are templates to help form those conversations. And then it's just also human nature and depends on how important that person is to the organization.
Thank you. I have two more questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
So, I'm getting these on my phone because there was an executive director who was not able to attend today, but said, "Hey, can you please ask these for me?" So I said, "Sure." So the next one is that this particular executive director has I would say, fairly young organization, 10 years old. They have gone through some growth stages, uh, but is consistently challenged with the board in terms of what their responsibility is in terms of fundraising. They have a board contract, they have a letter, they do onboarding and whatnot. And it seems to be, from what he was saying to me, no matter what he puts into place, he has all these great things put into place, it's putting into practice. So, do
Mhm.
either of you have any recommendations for how, if they have all of this great setup, administratively, but it's not being put into practice by the board member, how to manage that discussion? And again, because I always like to, I'm going to go back to him and I will do it for the crew here too. How can you help? Like where would a company like yours step in to assist in something like this for both of you?
Yeah, I mean, the first part I would say there is that if the executive director is feeling this way, they should ask their board chair to help because the conversations among board members and with regard to their financial investment in the organization should really come from the board chair and not put the executive director in the role of telling a board member that they are sort of falling short. Would be my first step.
Thank you.
I can weigh
And
in terms of how important it is to approach fundraising from a relationship building perspective, Allison. I think what I've seen work really well is at board retreats, taking it a step further and talking about the networks we have access to, how to tap into them, and even doing some role playing in
Mm.
conversations with whether it's if the board member is someone inclined to ask for dollars, that's a select few folks, right? Most of us would rather just kind of make introductions or suggest a partnership. But if you have board members who want to support the development director in that way, then it's a role playing conversation to help build up their skill sets. It's arming them with templates and tools to do to do that outreach more effectively. But for the folks who are more suited for relationship building, giving them specific examples of how to go out to their networks to bring in potential connections without putting the onus of the ask on them. So it's kind of two parallel pathways that can really start nicely at a board retreat, even if it's just the morning of getting together. I've seen work really well.
Mhm. I always like
thank
to
you.
have somebody send, as a board person, send me something that I can forward if I don't feel like making the ask myself. But sending something to a board member saying, would you mind? I see you're connected on LinkedIn to this person. Would you mind sending this email to them and making the introduction? I'll do all the work, but if you could make the meeting for me or you could make the connection, that goes a long, long way. And to your question about what consultants can do in this situation, they can do what we were talking about at the very beginning of this webinar is to do some overall education on what is the board's responsibility. They can be the facilitator or mediator to go through what are the terms of engagement, so to speak, for the board. What did they sign on to when they joined? And then be able to ask that board member, what's standing in the way for what's blocking you right now? And sometimes you hear what's blocking them, and I remember this happening to me, what's blocking them is somebody's having a real financial crisis at home and they don't want to share that broadly. So having somebody in the middle to ask those in a confidential way can be helpful. Or the person can say, I'm no longer that interested, or nobody's asked me, or nobody's asked me for enough. Sometimes people who have the means, if they're asked for too little, they find it insulting. So there's a whole realm of complex human psychology that goes on in all of these things and getting to the root of why and what makes somebody feel good and what makes somebody like want to give their money is so important because when the match is there and somebody gives money, it feels so good for them. And making sure that you can see that them light up and then you found the right thing to ask them for.
Thank you. I think too, just to tack on to what you're both saying is sometimes board members, even if there's some level of expectation laid out, they don't always still know how to integrate this into just a regular discussion, maybe on the soccer field when you're there watching your kids play soccer, how to make it just a natural part of your discussion. Um, and shameless plug here for NRH. We just put together a storytelling step-by-step guide for your nonprofit board. So if you want to take a look at that resource, we're happy to share that with you. It's something where you can just use as an executive director or a staff member to see how you might different ideas for you to come up with helping your board members understand that if you're on the soccer field and something comes up, this is a great opportunity, and you don't get that weird like, oh, I'm shaking the can feeling. So
Mhm.
we do
Right.
have to because it should be just as natural as you bragging about your kids. Like
Mhm.
you should love that organization so much that you're serving on that you're excited to talk about it. We have two questions in the chat here.
Mm.
Um, so one is from Gail Wilson, and is the give or get strategy for board members a wise approach?
My quick answer, since we're running short, and I'm happy to have a bigger conversation, Gail, is it depends. You don't want to lose board members who may have a lower ability to give, but focus on that get opportunity. By putting a number on it can can be difficult. And I think board engagement is a much bigger conversation. I don't know, Sophia, what you would say.
I agree. I would rather get $1 from somebody who than put a get on them. I would love the engagement. The engagement is more important than the amount of money they give at a certain point.
Thank you.
But I'm
So
happy again to talk more about it.
we have another question from Suzanne, but I'm not 100% sure the question fully came in. It's rebooting a board and fundraising post-COVID shrinkage. So I'm not
Yeah.
100% clear. I'll let you guys take that.
Well, I would say, Suzanne, start with the foundational elements of ensuring you have your roles and responsibilities in place. If you haven't anchored with board education and the board's overall role, kind of map out, maybe start with one or the other, or both, and have a session that really zeroes in so everyone has the same level of knowledge about what's expected of them. And then there's several ways you can go about recruitment, and we could share some resources or talk offline about where you might want to look given your mission, given the skill sets you're looking for, and how you approach it.
Mhm. And bigger isn't always better either. That's what I've seen, that the more nimble, right now, especially the smaller, in some cases, more nimble boards are able to make decisions more quickly than necessarily bringing it back to the levels it was.
All right, well, we are unfortunately at 1 o'clock, but I want to thank you both so much. We got quite a bit of information in a very short period of time. However, that said, if anybody here who has participated in today's webinar does want more time with Christine and or Sophia, please reach out to them. They are really tremendous at what they do, and they are here to support you. And they'll tell you all the different ways that they can do that for you. We got three new nonprofit partners while we were on this call, so thank
Yay.
you to those that joined today. There will be a recording available at some point, either later this week or early next week for you. If you have any questions about what Christine and Sophia do, please let us know. We'll be happy to connect you. If you have any questions about the Nonprofit Resource Hub, or you want access to our resources that we have been developing, like the fundraising guide, like the guide for nonprofits in terms of helping them become better storytellers. Go ahead on our website, they'll be available to you. And if you have any questions about topics you want to hear about or we're not covering it, let us know. We'll find the expert to talk about it. So that's it for me. I want to thank you both. Do you have any closing remarks?
Just thanking everyone for your time today. We know how busy you are, and we greatly appreciate you joining us. And just reach out if you have any feedback. We would love to hear it so we can continue to bring more education to you.
Mhm. We're all on the same team here. Let's try to make the world a better place together. We're here for you. You're not alone.
Yes. All right. And just so you guys know, we had lots of new people from Montana today. So I don't know how Montana got on this, but we love having you. So welcome, spread the word, and let's bring all of our nonprofits together. Thank you
Yep.
both again very much for your time. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Allison.